Hello, I'm Tara All, and this is EA Zoom meeting on July 13th. And today we are going to explore the astrological houses. And in preparation for this, for some reason, I was drawn to talk about houses again, although most of us have been through them or thought about them or studied them quite a bit. I always like to bring myself back to those basics and sometimes apply them in new ways based on what I'm learning and what people around me are sharing. So that's my intent today. And like always, for those of you who have heard me speak before, I like to try to leave at least a little chunk, 10 minutes at the end so that we can all share ideas. So I'm calling this session the spinning classroom wheel because for me, the houses in part are classrooms. I think of them that way. And so sometimes even I ask myself, so, what's going on here or what's going on there? And even if the experiences in that area are difficult, there's something comforting about knowing at least that we're in the house or in the classroom where we're really meant to be learning. And we can look at that by the planets and things that are happening in the chart. So we will just hop right in. There we go. Okay, so first of all, I want to talk about hemispheres and quadrants, because one of the ways that I break down the energy of the houses before going directly to a list of keywords of what's associated with them is I kind of look at the area of consciousness that we're exploring. So when we take a chart and we break it into an upper and lower hemisphere, that lower hemisphere represents subjective awareness, and the upper hemisphere represents objective awareness, and the left hemisphere represents self, and the right represents others. And the easiest way to break this down is to think that the first quadrant, which is the first, second, and third houses, is subjective awareness of self. And then moving into the second quadrant, the fourth, fifth, and sixth, that's subjective awareness of others. And then moving into the third, being the seventh, eighth, and ninth, now we're in objective awareness of others. And then as we round out the end of the wheel with 10, 11, and 12, we're in objective awareness of self. So those are just a simple way to divide a chart. And one thing is that if you're not super proficient at breaking down a whole chart for a reading, a real quick way to look at energy is just to split the chart this way and to look to see where the energy is happening. So the first easiest thing to say, hey, are most of the planets, above or below the horizon? And then that gives you an idea if the person's awareness in life is more subjective or objective. And if things are more in the left hemisphere versus the right, then the focus is going to be more on the self and the right more on others. And that's just kind of a quick snapshot, but it does give us an overall feel. Like in my chart, the majority of my personal planets are below the horizon. So my kind of go-to in life is a subjective awareness. And sometimes I have to really challenge myself to say, hey, wait a second, and really pay attention to what that person's doing or what that person is saying in their own right. Just because my tendency is to come from, from my own place of awareness. And then this picture there's at the bottom of this little picture, I have just drawn some little pictures of cardinal, fixed, and mutable, and that's what I'm going to talk about next, but the picture won't be on the next slide. But I wanted you to see, if you haven't already looked at it this way, the flow of energy with these modalities. So cardinal is, arrow shooting straight forward. It's basically unrestrained energy going in a forward initiative direction. And fixed energy, you take whatever the thing is, and all those energy arrows now point in towards the thing. So when you think about the nature of energy, there's a huge difference in feeling between energy that is shooting forward in a straight motion with no end versus energy that's all coming in at a focal point. And then mutable is the opposite of fixed, being from the focal point, the arrows of energy all shoot directly out from that place. So the next thing that I look at, first of all, when I'm thinking about houses, before getting into the nitty-gritty details, is the house a cardinal, fixed, or mutable house? Being, how does the energy actually move? And this is something that I challenge myself and my students to really feel into, even letting go of some of like the names of things and labels of things, but just what is the feel of the energy in that house? You know, what does that energy want to do? In other words, if someone has a lot of planets and activity happening in cardinal houses, before you even break it down by those signs and the aspects and all of that, you know that all that cardinal energy, it wants to move forward. You know, it wants to initiate things. And that tells you a lot about the person and about the kind of energy that they're meant to work with. So this feeling into it, I think, can be very helpful. So cardinal is about initiation, starting things. Not always the best at follow through, but great at getting things started, motivating to start new experiences, move things forward, make things happen. And then fixed, I always think about the fixed signs and houses. Of course, Lauren Albandian being my first teacher, she would really always pound into us the idea of VMP, right? Value, meaning, and purpose. And that has really stuck with me, and it works and makes sense for me. The fixed energy, it wants to find value, meaning, and purpose and secure whatever was initiated prior to it. So here's how the three are always working together as well. So fixed energy, this is why we see it as that little center with all the arrows of energy pointing in, because all the energy is coming back in upon itself to make it sustainable, to make it sufficient, to make it live, to make it survive. This little drawing on the left is just my little squiggles, because when I was thinking and preparing for this, I was thinking about value, meaning, and purpose with the houses, because usually I should associate this more with the fixed signs. And I was thinking about the second and the fifth houses and value, meaning, and purpose. And because those are subjective houses, that value, meaning, and purpose is really about to or for me. So when we're looking at a difference between the fixed houses below and above the horizon, that's one thing to consider. If we're up in the 8th or 11th house, it's more about what is the value, meaning, and purpose to or for us, because now it is actually including others. And then with mutable, mutability is all about getting relative perspective. And to me, the mutability is all about transition. It moves us from one thing to another thing. And so this is why the mutable cross and mutable energy is associated with learning, because it's about the flexibility of taking what has been established before, and then how do we start to become flexible and move it around so we can actually move it into starting something new. Hence the focus in the center and all the energy shooting out. And this is why oftentimes with mutable energy, there's a lot of dispersing of energy, energy all over the place. And that's partially because these transition times are not very easy, in the sense that we can't fall back on what we already know because a change is happening. But we don't know what's going to come forward. So it really is that, some people use the vision of, someone jumping, over, log to log in a river or something. It's that place where you're up in between starting point and landing point. So mutability is about navigating the space between things. And in the houses, as we go through and look at it, mutability takes us, there's the bridge between each of the quadrants. So it really is about bridging one quadrant of experience into the next, which is a big shift in awareness. If we even think about from the first quadrant, from subjective awareness of self, into the second quadrant of subjective awareness of others, moving us into the realm of others is in part the job of that third house space between bridge. We'll talk about this, I think, a little bit more as we go, but you probably get the idea. And also, I just, when I feel into mutability and its nature, there's something about a grace and the fluidity of it. And it's interesting to think about how we find stability in the complete transition, because that's part of the, I think, lessons around a real focus on mutable energy. All right, so the houses, what are they? Well, to me, they're fields of experience. So the planets are functions. Planets are doing something, and they represent parts of our psyche. And the signs are adjectives or descriptors of how that action is happening. And to me, the houses are the fields of experience where the action is happening. So if a planet is an actor in the cast of characters on your board of directors that makes up your overall being, then the house that that character is in is sort of, where stuff is happening. So it is my belief that houses show us the experiences that we're specifically attracting so that we can learn, explore, evolve, develop ourselves. It's kind of showing us where we're living. And from an evolutionary standpoint, we can look and see where have we been living our experiences in the past and where we're meant or where we have the opportunity for a lot of growth currently and in the future. And that part gets me excited about houses. Because again, this is about, okay, what classroom am I in? If my South Node is in the first house, for example, then that shows that I've been spending a lot of time learning and exploring around first house activities or experiences or happenings in my life. And so then if my North Node is in the 7th house, one way that we can describe this to someone is a great classroom to further your own education and your own evolution is to choose that 7th house more. And so that's the part that I like about this. It's kind of the freedom to say, wow, if I have planets or signatures or things in certain houses, I can choose that classroom, right? And it doesn't have to be on a big level. And we can also then, but just by observing what's going on in our lives, see where, we're really spending most of our time. We can correlate that with the chart, and we can kind of have all kinds of fun with that. So one thing I wanted to share is that I believe that the houses, they carry the energy of the signs that rule them. Meaning, for example, that the 12th house is Pisces house. So the 12th house and 12th house activities have a lot of Piscean energy in them. But I don't believe that it's exactly the same as having planets in those signs. And what I mean by that is that having Venus in the 6th house, to me, is not exactly the same as having a Venus in Virgo. There are similarities, and probably the most easy way to learn about energy, especially from a beginner standpoint and maybe even intermediate, is to think about, for example, a Venus in Virgo in the 6th house, to think of that as kind of a double Virgo signature. But I believe there's a difference between being wired with a certain energy and having experiences or having the area of life being triggered around that. So an example I would use for this would be, I have Pluto in the 6th house. And a lot of my experiences and a lot of my evolution comes through 6th house type experiences, comes through my work, comes through my health, comes through service, comes through lessons of humility, comes through my own critical mind that can be a disservice to myself or to others, and how I improve myself or how my immediate environment is like in mundane life, right? I get hung up on the details, but that is very different than if I had a bunch of personal planets in Virgo, which I do not have planets in Virgo. And so my observation of clients and friends and myself is that there's a difference between living, kind of breathing a wiring of an energy and being in that area of experience. But I think it feels very, very similar. So I just offer that for a little distinction, if that is helpful. And if not, like anything else I say, throw it out the window and go with what your gut says. So let's talk about the first house. I like to think of the first house as the first step into density, because from a cycle perspective, we're coming from the 12th house where everything was dissolved into oneness, and now this is the first step down. We're coming down from no thing to being a thing, which is interesting in itself because that initial impulse to be alive, it's generally not embodied yet. The second house tends to be where we really associate embodiment. And the first house, especially because it is also the sign of the ascendant or the rising sign, we put a lot of importance on this house. And I feel like the ascendant itself really is our life vehicle. It's kind of the best approach we have to move through life. It's not all the deep layers of who we are, but it's also not just a mask or a self-image like many people will teach. I feel like it really is that vehicle. And I also feel in some ways that the rising is who we are learning to be. It's like who we're coming out as. Like we are coming out of this oneness of the 12th house, and all of a sudden now we're bursting out as this new bit of energy. And I think that there's a newness to it. Of course, we know that things in the first house are very impulsive and instinctual. So back to the simple pieces that I started to talk about before, we can look at the element. It's a fire house. So we know the properties of fire, right? Fire is subject to levity, and fire can move fast, and fire can snap, crackle, and pop, and fire gets hot, and fire can burn out, and all these things about fire. And then we add cardinal, which is wanting to initiate something. And then we add quality, which in this case is masculine or yang. We have this huge amount of life force bursting out with those arrows shooting straight forward. So if the first house is our classroom for any part of us, so if you have anything in the first house, which we all have a rising, so it's there, but if you have other planets there, things happening there, in some ways that's the classroom. That's where things are happening around that part of your psyche or that part of yourself. So that will be tied in with your sense of self, especially the sense of self that you put out there into the world. I always think about the first house as kind of how we show up to a party, right? It's the part of us that just shows up in life without overthinking it. It's also our physical body. So things in the first house oftentimes have links with the body itself or energy running through the body. There's a huge amount of energy in the first house. So in my mind, anything in the first house is going to be extra energized. Or that energy could be, if it's difficultly aspected, could be repressed or stuck, but the amount of energy is still there. The question then just becomes, how to unlock it or how to let the channel flow differently. So the first house also is vitality, health. It's your personal style. It's independence. It's the impression you make on others. I think that for me, action and movement has a lot to do with the first house, because that first house is active energy. It wants to start things and move things forward. So anybody with planets in the first house, the functions of those planets, they're active. They oftentimes want to be the lead. They want to innovate. They want to get going. They don't want to sit on things. There can be an impatience, and there can be a false sense of safety just in pure movement. And the other thing is that the first house, being Aries house, naturally, it's a very animalistic, instinctual placement. So things in that house have an animal magnetism to them, whether or not we're aware of it. Aryan things in nature get noticed because it just has that sort of, it's just like it has a primal energy to it that people notice. So into the second house. We then move into, it's an earth house. So now think about it this way, all that energy that was shooting straight forward, fiery energy going forward, now we have fixed earth. So now all of a sudden, all that energy that was shooting straight forward is brought into a circle and then focused into a center point. So anything in the second house, its nature is going to be very different from wanting to shoot off and strike its own way, start something new, prove that it can do it. One thing about the first house I didn't say is oftentimes there just are certainly like tests to the physical body, simply like, can I do it? So planets and functions that are sitting in the first house, oftentimes we test them out in that area through just trying to see if we can do it. That's a big piece with that first house, just with the Aryan energy of can I make it happen? But back to the second house, now we're dealing with material world security. And so this house has a lot to do with your resources, all resources, from your self-worth all the way to your money and your possessions, the things that you own. It's also self-sufficiency, earning and spending habits. So it's your bank balance, and it also shows oftentimes how you spend your money. So if you look at the sign on the second house and look at the planet that rules that, oftentimes that will show you where a lot of your money or resources go. And that's an interesting thing to look at. So it's what you earn, and then your attitude also towards what you own. So in the second house by nature, we have a tendency to want to say it's mine, it's my stuff, my money. And then we have a tendency to protect it and hunker down with it. And this is why second house sometimes gets associated with hoarding things, right? There's a fear that there won't be enough stuff. That value, meaning, and purpose in the second house is really sort of looking for, how do I establish my self-worth? And oftentimes we do that through how stable I am in my life. What money do I make? Can I feed myself? Can I feed my family? What do I have? But this idea that it's mine, right? This idea that it is mine, I need to thrive and survive and stabilize. So the second house is also about putting down roots, physical roots, and embodying things. So any planets or things that are happening in the second house, transits that come to the second house, you can think about what is wanted in that classroom. On some level, there's a need for self-sufficiency, a need to really figure out either how to make resources, how to value resources, how to use resources, how to be able to choose what really has value to put your energy into. The second house is, it's not just working for nothing. The second house is really choosing based on what has value. So there can oftentimes be a sorting out in the second house of values in general. And then we come to the third house, which will round out our first quadrant. So these first three houses are all the subjective awareness of self. So in the first house, first step into density, I'm aware that I'm a being and I'm alive. So in some respects, I want to put my hand on the stove and check it out for myself, even if I know that it burns everybody else, because from that experience, I don't really see anything else happening. It's me. And I see me, and even if everyone else can see me, a very Aryan first house type of trait is that we think we're doing something privately, but really the whole world can see everything that we're doing. Because that's it. Like, there's no mirror with that first house or with Aries. It's simply me doing me, which is why the action is so important, because it's by doing the things that I learn about me. And then the second house, it's still subjective awareness of myself, but now it's about how it can actually take care of me, feed me, stabilize. What are my resources? What do I have to work with? And how can I contain them and protect them and make sure that they're mine and available for my use? So the third house, now we've sort of like stabilized the self, if you will. So I've become alive, I can feed myself. I have a home, I've done those things. And now all of a sudden I want to really get some relative perspective on, well, who am I in relation to anything else? Because the first two houses can be so subjective that we don't have much to compare it to. So in the third house, and our first air sign, we start looking at connections between things in a new way. It's mutable and it's yang, so we want to be flexible and look around and explore different areas. And we want to do it in a pretty assertive way. So this is where the first place in the wheel that we really start learning socially and intellectually. So this is where all kinds of talking, communication, language, how we use our mind, putting things together. I think about the third house for me is it's like big exploration in the small known space, because it represents our immediate environment. It even represents our nervous system, our internal wiring. It's how we get from here to there, like short distance wise, right? So on trains or from cars or from this to there, things connecting in that way. And so it's like, I imagine that we're in this small space and we're super curious to explore, but there's still containment around it. In other words, we're not to the ninth house yet, which is huge exploration without knowing. It's okay, I'm going to explore what I know. So siblings fall in here, neighbors fall in here, all that immediate environment. And for me also, this is making sense of things. And I have a little note here that it's like, me here, me there, me with you. But a big part of this third house is me using you, and I'm using you just representative of any other to process. So the third house in Gemini oftentimes talks at you, because what is it trying to do? It's trying to externally process and understand what fits here, what fits there, and what is this and what is that. And that's getting us ready to move into the next quadrant, which becomes subjective awareness of others. So the third house is the bridge or the transition where we are literally getting ready now to start paying attention to what other people are doing and how that's impacting us. But in the third house, like that's kind of first where we start to get some measures around things, and also recognize that there's two sides to things, right? Like there really is another side to it. So when we come into the fourth house, we're back to Cardinal again, which means something new is initiating. And again, I think from the more simple standpoint, it's all Cardinal houses are initiating something. And when you just think about that, looking at a fourth house that's full, for example, you start to get a feel again for that. Well, okay, where's the energy going again? Oh, it's going in a straight flowing motion. So how might that person move through life? And again, I keep kind of taking us back to the simple, but the simple really isn't that simple when we pay attention to it, because it permeates everything. So this fourth house, we're initiating action on the emotional and soul level. This is where feelings start to come into things. And so this is the first area where I think about it this way, and all this is simplified, right? I mean, we can't, anytime we define anything, like we're basically just, chopping it off at the whatever. And I'm aware of that, but we do the best we can to try to understand in pieces that we can. I just always leave room for knowing that there's more and that I'm probably only ever scratching the surface. But I think about in the third house experiences, we don't care that much how someone else is making us feel, for example. Like maybe we're just like birds are like words flying out of our mouths and we're talking and we're sharing, or I'm having conversations actually to hear myself or just to hear the chatter because I like the chatter and I like learning and I like getting the information. It's not until the fourth house that we start to recognize that all that makes us feel a certain way. So it's in the fourth house where all of a sudden we start to get super sensitive, because we start to feel all of a sudden the people around us are quote unquote, that they're doing something to me, or they're making me feel a certain way, or they're not giving me something that I need. And I think this is really reflective of moving on the wheel to all of a sudden the subjective awareness of others. We're aware of others, but it's still subjective. In other words, I'm aware of you, but from the standpoint of what you are doing or not doing for or to me. And again, nobody's operating just in one place. So none of us are operating just from a place of subjective awareness of others. But when you look at planets or signatures in that area, it helps us understand what's happening there. And it's because that's what's supposed to be happening there. So in this area, fourth house, we're starting to really feel emotional security. Do we have emotional self-security? What are our roots? Where do we belong? We look at our families. One thing that I noted I wanted to mention was in the first house, that's me being born as an independent being into the unknown. Like that's the excitement of the first house. Like that's me as an unknown thing. But into the fourth house, that's me being born as my mother and my father's child. That's me being born into my family, into the known. So there's a difference here, and there's a different feel and a different attachment. The first house is I'm born to me, into the world. Fourth house, I'm born to a family. And that comes with different attachments. And, I've talked a lot about the fourth house before, so we won't get into it here, but you can see how that really ties in with it. So we have psychological foundation, our ancestry. In general, the fourth house can be places of rest. And for me, that fourth house, when there's a lot of activity going there, it's always about finding a sense of home on the inside. But generally, the activities of life that we go through show us our dependencies, and all the issues with external ideas of belonging and home, because it pushes us back on the inside. And that's what's supposed to happen in the fourth house, because the fourth house is where we're really trying to come into a strong, rooted basis of ourselves. And remember, the fourth house is where we are coming up with our self-identity, that we are forming ourselves. You know, we have an instinctual self that comes forward that's represented by the first house. And in some respects, you know, the moon also shows some of that, because it's very instinctual. But when we weave those things together, it's the fourth house where we're getting deeper into ourselves. And now we're saying, wait a second, I get to form my identity. And I get to really feel into where I come from and where my roots are. And that goes through past my family. So when we come into the fifth house, right, we just initiated the emotional experience, which has a lot to do with how I'm reacting to life, right? So the fourth house, if you've got stuff in the fourth house, you are meant to deal with your reactions to people and to life. And that's how you'll be maturing, is by probably having a lot of experiences that don't feel very mature initially, either on your part or others. But initially, we come to that house wanting to have an emotional experience. And then through that emotional experience, we feel deeper who we are in our psychological foundation, which is beyond just, okay, you know, here's my sensual nature from the second house, and my life force energy from the first, and here's my mind and wiring from the third. The fourth is, oh, here's the guts of me. And so once I'm into the guts of me, now I say, okay, well, this is me. This is the me I want to take out into the world. And the fifth house is where we really want to make that me. We want to make it strong, and we want people to appreciate it and love it. And so these are, you know, all the associations around self-expression, creativity. You know, this is a fixed house again, so now all the energy is coming back in. Well, so we will joke sometimes about Leo in the fifth house, all about me. Well, it's supposed to be all about you. And once you figure out what you need to know about you, then you can go work with the polarity point of Aquarius in the 11th and figure out where it fits for a greater purpose. But to be able to find that place, you have to know yourself and have a confidence in expressing it so you can find that. So I don't like the many times that you know, people kind of say, well, there's this huge self-centeredness. I say, well, this is the area where you're supposed to be centered in yourself. And then you can make choices to be, you know, to be kind and caring and to make room for other people around that, but you're supposed to be in the center of yourself here. So it's fire, yang, energy fixed, right? It's all the power of fire, this huge bonfire within myself where I'm basically creating life. So the fourth house is the family I'm born into. The fifth house is what I create in my life. It's what we give birth to, our creations. Sometimes known as the party house. It also has a lot to do with risk-taking and leadership in the fifth house as well. Shining our light, putting ourselves out there, and really being who we are. Authoring our own destiny, I think sometimes sits here. But the fifth house is about finding the value in me expressing who I am. And this is why oftentimes fifth house and Leo has a lot of difficulties in demanding attention or not feeling loved or not getting the right audience. And that's because I feel like something in the fourth house or with Cancer didn't go right. So instead of coming from a deep sense of I'm forming an identity that's strong and who I am, that part gets mixed or missed. And then we try to go shine something on a stage and it doesn't line up, you know, and there's something wrong with that, but sometimes it requires a little step back before we figure out what's the right thing to bring to the stage and where's the right stage and what's the right audience. So some of that's all happening here. And then in the sixth house is Earth, and it's mutable and it's yin. So this is really where we're looking at tangible things. So we've sort of fired ourselves up to be who we are, and oftentimes in those fifth house Leo experiences, we overshoot because that's what we tend to do. And so the sixth house, we kind of come back down and say, well, you know, if the fifth house was the top of the pyramid, I'm at the top of the pyramid, sixth house becomes the inverted pyramid, and now I'm learning to be at the bottom, to be of service to things. So this is where we learn the flexibility of being more human. You know, sixth house experiences can be really difficult because they have a lot to do around self-improvement and purification. And what I mean by purification is being more purely who we are. So there can be layers of things that we have to either shed off or clean up to get down to the true essence of who we are, especially if we've overdeveloped areas to either get attention or to be accepted or to feel loved in ways that weren't natural to us. The sixth house is kind of where we go through this whole filtration process of, oh, you know, what belongs, what doesn't belong. So this is where we have work, service, physical health, chores, how you get your work done, nutrition. In some respects, you know, these are the more mundane aspects of life. But we're here living on this plane. So it's in this area, especially those of us who have strong signatures here, you know, it's not to get stuck in the mundane. It's to find a way of peace and ease around it with our human existence, to have healthy ego with healthy humility, so that we then can move up into the next half of the wheel, because the sixth house gets us ready to move into objective awareness. So all that we talked about has been subjective. So we've gone through all these steps or classrooms of developing me. First, it's subjective awareness of myself, then subjective awareness of others has continued. And here is where maybe it's the most critical bridge here. So if you have strong things in the sixth house, you really want to pay attention, because that's a complete transition from my experience to now my experience out there with other and in true relationship. So when we jump over that border, the seventh house is initiating something new again. So if we've done, you know, the work in a way that's prepared us, we're now ready to equally meet someone else in our pure essence of who we are, healthy ego, healthy humility, ready to show up and be who we are, and to let someone else show up and be who they are. That ultimately is the beauty of the seventh house. It's just that, again, oftentimes, you know, we have to move back to other places to really get to that place, because it's interesting that the seventh house is really about relationship, wants that, but it's learning, right? The seventh house is new, so it's learning about relationships and it's learning to love. And because it's new, and because it's the first time it's looking in a mirror and all of a sudden having something really mirrored back to it, you know, there's all the issues around projection around this. So sometimes seventh house experiences can be less than authentic because we're not fully comfortable there. So here we are with intellectual and social action. In other words, we're wanting to take action to socially and intellectually engage with people. We want to partner with people. We want to, oftentimes, like, it can be like wanting to form contracts, work relationships, personal relationships. It's the balance of giving and receiving, learning about cooperation, interdependence. You know, what's it like to be on a seesaw and find balance? So the seventh house has a lot to do with the right amount of tension on either side of the seesaw to find balance, because balance isn't possible without tension. But if there's way too much to one side versus the other, which has a tendency to happen with seventh house experiences, because we're learning relationships and we're learning balance and we're learning how to show up. And we're also learning about our public and social awareness, because that seventh house is the first time where we're actually really paying attention to what other people are doing. Not just what they're doing to us or how they're affecting us or receiving us, but what they're actually doing on their own. It's like our first opportunity to really see, wow, that person in their own existence. And then in a more elevated place would be to really see how that person then shows you parts of your own existence. So once that initiates here, then the next step from there is the eighth house. And the eighth house is where we want to take it deeper. So any fixed sign, again, wants to take what was initiated and now give it value, meaning, and purpose to really secure it. So this is why 8th house experiences with relationships, we relate oftentimes to intimacy. It's interesting because in signatures, oftentimes, we get married around 7th house stuff, but the marriage is just the marriage. Like, it's the 8th house where we really develop the deep connections and intimacies. So it's interesting even looking at like the sign on the 7th house cusp, and oftentimes we'll be attracted to that energy, right? And so when we choose relationships of that nature, and then once that relationship progresses and we've kind of lived the 7th house piece of it, we've done the mirror, we've done this, we're learning about love, learning about the relationship, learning about the contract that we made, then all of a sudden we find out that for deep intimacy and for real deep soul and emotional connection, we want and need what's on the cusp of the 8th house or things in the 8th house. But oftentimes we didn't pay attention to that because the 7th house was initially attractive. So I always advise people in relationship things and looking for relationships, pay attention to the 8th house. It's what lets you endure. It's what lets you go further. It's more than just the image of, you're a great partner for me and I want to team up with you. It's I really want to know you deeper and I want you to know me deeper. So in the 8th house, we have intimacy, sex, death. It's also things beyond our control. I think about 8th house lessons being it's learning power and control and everything that comes around that. Shared resources. Anytime that we let go of our control, because any true sharing of something means you don't have full control over it. Same thing with sex. We link that in there because orgasm also is not within our control. Death is not within our control. These are the things that we're learning that we can't necessarily, like from the 2nd house perspective, I can control and keep myself safe and keep myself secure, but we learn there's a limit to that. In the 8th house, that polarity is where we learn that there's only so much we can do on our own with that self-sufficiency, and then to have more, we have to take that risk. The 8th house also represents our shadow and the underworld and things that are buried and hidden. But these things that are buried and hidden in the 8th house, we know they're there on some level, which is contrast to the 12th house, which they've been buried so long we don't remember anymore. But the 8th house, it's stuff is there. So the 8th house, we wanted to give value, meaning, and purpose to relationships that we initiate, for example. And then come the 9th house, now all of a sudden we're really trying to get relative perspective on that. And so we're back to fire again. And fire is always linked up with identity, but in this case, because it's mutable fire, it's learning on the identity level. So at this point, we've kind of gone as far as we can in developing ourselves in some ways. And so in the 9th house is the 9th house is the last push. How big can I go? We're now heading up to the 10th house after this. So this is sort of the big expansion period, bigger context, bigger lands, bigger places, because this is where we want to know ourselves in unknown places. So in contrast to the 3rd house, which is exploration on a big level in a small space, which on some levels means that there's still an element of safety and control there, the 9th house is all about learning more about myself in a completely foreign environment. So strong signatures in the 9th house speak to, it can be physical long distance travel because that puts us with new cultures, new places where we see ourselves and feel ourselves differently. It can also be just mental exploration, emotional exploration. It can be truly on any level, but the trick to the 9th house is you're not really doing it if you know it. The 9th house is a challenge into the unknown. And only in the unknown will parts of you emerge authentically, experientially. So the 9th house has a lot to do with raw experiences of life. So if that's a classroom for you, choosing that, whatever it means for you, is really where the juice of the growth will happen. And it's through that process that we come to our own truth about our beliefs, our philosophy. That's where we uncover the true nature of ourselves, right? Not like the conditioned part or me and my family or me here, but when I stick myself here in this total unknown situation, what emerges? The 9th house also is, it's like gypsy land too. It's wanting to be free and explore freedom, but how we respond to those explorations depends on the signatures and what we're looking at. You know, for some of us, some of our signatures it's fun, and for others it's terrifying, but you know, it's the unknown, and it's the unlimited, and it's the forever growing and expanding. So that ninth house prepared us in some ways. I think about this way in some ways too. The eighth house has a lot to do with power. So the eighth house is we're learning about power and how we team up with other sources to further empower ourselves. And then in the ninth house, we really start to put legs under that power, right? Sag is a centaur, like the legs under it, right? The power starts to move out and expand. So in my mind, it's really the ninth house where we climb the mountain. I know we talk about 10th house in Capricorn as the mountain, but to me, the ninth house is where we climb it. Because the 10th house is where we actually take all of it and start to synthesize and organize and say, how am I now going to turn this into something useful that I distribute? Because to me, the 10th house in Capricorn have a lot to do with dissemination. How we take what we've learned, how far we've developed in our lives, and now it becomes this last quadrant, which is objective awareness of self, which is interesting because we just had all this exploration of others, you know, others and how they're affecting me, and others and what they're doing and how I can team up with them. But now this is awareness of everything, but it's how I fit into that. And a big part of this last quadrant is how I give back and how I'm useful to the collective. So 10th house is a huge focus on social standing, public life, which can be our career, but also just who we are out there publicly. It can be attached to achievement, you know, what we're achieving, the empires that we're building. You know, this is cardinal energy, so it's initiating something, but it's yin. And so in my mind, the 10th house in Capricorn aren't initiating building something new. They're taking everything we've already done and synthesizing it together, weaving it into like a big living organism. This is why Capricorn and 10th house energies are so powerful with leading big organizations, because they're good at taking everything that's already existing and bringing it together. It's like nature, right? All these things are, it's like Mother Nature in some ways. I think that there's a likeness to that. And then into the 11th house. So now the 10th house, we initiated that, and now there's a wanting to, again, bring value, meaning, and purpose to it. So how do we take that public image or that achievement or that thing, and how do we actually kind of secure it? And here's where oftentimes, you know, we link up with causes, you know, like-minded people. It's interesting because Aquarius and the 11th house have a lot to do with freedom and renovation and individuated thinking and outside the box, but at the same time, it wants it to have value, meaning, and purpose. So it's out there in that way, but once it's out there, then it wants structure that actually does good, that makes something happen. In other words, if I have this amazing idea to go out and do this thing in the world, how's that thing actually going to work? And how is it going to have meaning and purpose? And what does it truly serve? So the 11th house, all that energy is coming back in again, which is why oftentimes we'll find 11th house in Aquarius, you know, they may be progressive, but they're can be pretty rigid in their progressive beliefs and in how they share them, you know, and in the stubbornness of defending them, which is important, because once we've decided sort of what we want something to be, then there's a need for that. But the 11th house also is the reaction to the 10th house. So there's two pieces. It also is the reaction where if anything has become too rigid in that building process, which sometimes it has. In other words, I climbed my mountain, 9th house, I've done my huge expansion, and now I'm very attached to here's my truth, here's my vision. In the 10th house, let's just say I solidify that into a company. The 11th house is also where I might have to realize, oh, wait a second, like the value actually isn't what I want it to be. And that may be where I need to let go and break down those crystallized structures. Because the 11th house ultimately, you know, it's the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So it's important that it's making things better, you know, really making things better. And with the freedom for people to be who they are, but at the same time, to have some structure around that. And then we come to the end of the wheel, which is interesting. You know, all this stuff is happening, and as things are dying down, the 11th house kind of this push for, you know, how we're going to bring humanity together, how we're going to make things better, and how we get some of our freedom back if we become too stuck. And the 12th house is, you know, where ultimately we look at the big vision and we get ready to wrap things down into the compost pile for the next thing that will come forward. So this is the final mutable sign, and it's water, and I think it's where we learn to be flexible. We lose our duality. I think about the 12th house as where it can represent death, but to me, more than anything, it's a death of duality. You know, it's like everything that I just built up, part of it in some respects is an illusion, and I go back to oneness. So the 12th house is all experiences around spirituality, the dream world, connecting to something greater, whatever our beliefs or ways of merging with God consciousness is here. But it also are things, you know, there's a lot of, could be karma buried here. And I talked about the 8th house being things that are buried that we know they're there, but we just shoved them way back in the closet. The 12th house, things can come up where we don't even remember that we gave them up, or that we did bury them somewhere. And so they can surprise us, you know, and they're not always just ours, you know, they can be ancestral or collective. So the 12th house is an interesting place. It's sort of like where everything culminates, and that everything is not just the earth plane. So there's can be a lot of potential for sacrifice and for, you know, fear of being dissolved into nothingness, depending on, you know, what our belief is. So at that point, literally, I mean, we're getting ready to melt. So there's sort of a feeling in 12th house experiences that, you know, that we need a fluidity, and that everything that had become so solid and defined starts to sort of break away. It's interesting, like I think in the very beginning of all this, I made this little diagram, and I talked about how, you know, in the 11th house, we kind of come to this place of, you know, things don't, you know, matter all that much anyway. Let's just sort of, you know, break out. And it's interesting, we have that big reaction, and then all of a sudden, like, we all come back to everything anyway. So those houses have an interesting interplay, and if you have things in them, it's interesting to pay attention to that there can be a strange pull between 10th, 11th, and 12th, I think, in particular, and a huge feeling of self-responsibility at that point, because again, that's objective awareness of self. So it's almost like being able to step away from you and see everything and see where you're at and where you fit, and for better or for worse, however you define that, it's like the last stages of what you'll do with you, you know, what you'll make of you and what you'll experience of you. So I've only left us 2 minutes, which I meant to leave us more. Does anyone have anything quickly that they want to share?
Tara, you can go over 2 minutes if you like.
Okay, because I'd like you guys to be able to share. The one thing in my last slide, it's been on my mind lately, and maybe it's just other things I'm doing in my life, but, you know, there really is nothing really fits just one definition. You know, everything's kind of flowing from one thing into the other. And so I think for us just to be careful of where we assign things, you know, is important. And so as I was thinking about this, I thought, you know, someone else's experience of the 9th house could be totally different than someone else's experience, because I guess in my philosophy, that thing happening in the 9th house is happening in another cycle, in another cycle, in another cycle, which leads me to my real point, which is there's not like a more evolved or less evolved or beginning or later. So like, just because my 12th house is full doesn't mean I'm so evolved and ready, you know, to move on to the next planet and not come back. It may be that I'm, you know, in a 2nd house experience of, you know, a 1st house cycle of something else. And I just wanted to offer that because that's come up for me a few times in my life lately, and I don't really like those comparisons of, you know, further ahead or further behind. What do you guys have?
Okay, well, thank you so much. That was amazing. Any questions from anybody?
Or even just comments or insights that you have?
I really loved, you know, the diagram at the beginning with the objective, subjective awareness, etc. I love that. And I loved your little diagrams of cardinal, fixed and mutable. That was really good. Yeah.
I think that sounds like that's probably it. Nobody has anything, so thank you for spending time with me with the houses.
Okay, thank you so much, Tara. And thanks from all of us. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.